two brothers and I alone in a room together. Greetings, I am Emily Carter. Today I wish to share a haunting event from my life that stirs a deep sense of regret and self-blame. I wish I hadn't gone through this experience, but as we all understand, life is far from perfect. This tale began many years ago to the age of 18, living with my family in the captivating city of London, a place filled with charm yet concealing its own darkness. I thought I had it all. My family is flourishing, and both of my parents have achieved remarkable success. I invite you to subscribe to my channel, allowing me to share more engaging and authentic stories like this one. Furthermore, make sure to view this video in full and give it a thumbs up, as the storyline is bound to be remarkably captivating. Please take a moment to click the like button to show your support. Michael. My father is occupied with his work. My father runs a business while my mother, Elizabeth, showcases her exceptional taste as an interior designer. Even with their busy jobs, my parents always made it a point to spend time with me and my two older brothers, Ethan and Lucas, who are both 2 years older than I am. Both possess an exceptional allure and charm. I have always felt a deep sense of pride in having brothers like these. As the youngest, my parents showered me with both financial support and affection, ensuring I wanted for nothing. However, I must confess that even though their love was powerful, it paled in comparison to the affection I received from Ethan and Lucas. They were not just my brothers, they were my protectors and friends, always there to watch over and support me. Their affection stood out, unlike my parents, through their unwavering display of care in both actions and gestures. Their affection centered primarily on provision. Ethan and Lucas offered me a level of solace that my parents occasionally fell short of providing. They had a natural talent for sensing my emotional state, even in silence. They served as my main confidants, providing a space for conversation free from judgment. In my early years, whenever I encountered bullying or distress at school, it was Ethan and Lucas who stood up for me. I remember a moment when my peers mocked my outfit, leaving me in tears. The two brothers not only offered me comfort, but also took action at the school to resolve the issue. They chose not to engage in violence. Their sharp words and calm presence guaranteed that the bullies would never have the courage to hurt me again. They were champions, always ready to lend a hand whenever I needed help. Recall those evenings when the entire family came together, yet I always found comfort sitting between Ethan and Lucas. They would embrace me warmly, frequently playfully debating who would take the seat beside me. They constantly joked that I was their little princess, and that it was their responsibility to keep me safe. Eternally, as time passed, I started to sense that their affection was distinct from anyone else's in the family. They were the initial ones to support me during the challenging years of adolescence. As I began to feel uncertain about my appearance, Lucas dedicated time to show me how to apply cosmetics, serving as a gentle reminder of my inherent beauty, just as I am. Ethan assisted me in choosing clothes, referring to me as the cutest little sister in the world. They filled me with a sense of uniqueness and affection, without limitations in my perspective. My brothers were more than mere family. They served as my emotional support during the times my parents were preoccupied with their jobs. Ethan and Lucas ensured that solitude was never my companion. They accompanied me to school, assisted me with my homework, and provided me with companionship. There were nights when sleep eluded me, prompting me to knock on their doors. They would always embrace my presence, sharing amusing tales or simply keeping me company until I drifted off to sleep. The subtle gestures led me to feel that their affection for me ran deeper than what I experienced from my parents. Yet that affection, the one I believed to be untainted, transformed into the root of my deepest remorse. This is a narrative that requires a more extensive elaboration. I doubt anyone will fully grasp it, but everything that unfolded when I was 18 utterly transformed my existence. When I discovered the courage, I will share the rest of that memory with you. I recall every detail vividly. As the youngest in the family, I frequently engaged in foolish antics, unbothered by the prospect of consequences. At times, I would spring into their laps. I would occasionally leap into their laps or settle beside them as though it were a usual event. Ethan and Lucas, my siblings, were also my dearest friends and the ones I felt most at ease with. On a bright summer afternoon, I stepped out of my bedroom. Sunlight streamed through the expansive window, filling the living space with a serene atmosphere. Ethan and Lucas lounged on the sofa, completely absorbed in a television show that I was not aware of their observing material, yet both seemed completely absorbed. I moved closer, absent-mindedly rubbing my eyes. I stayed quiet and moved in quietly. As I approached, I noticed that neither of them had noticed my existence. Still, I smiled. I joyfully bounded onto the sofa and nestled onto both of their laps. Ethan was taken by surprise and jumped, eliciting laughter from Lucas. "Dear little sister, may I ask what occupies your time?" I simply chuckled, stayed quiet, and settled comfortably on their laps, resting my head on Ethan's shoulder. "What has captured both of your attention so thoroughly?" I asked. As I cast my eyes upon the television screen, I noted their lack of immediate response, revealing that they were engrossed in a romantic film. At that moment, the film reached its conclusion, showcasing an emotional scene in which they embrace fervently before sharing a kiss. Do not observe elegance. This is not a movie appropriate for young audiences. I laughed softly, freeing myself from his grasp. I have outgrown my childhood. I am 18 years old. Even with my light-hearted demeanor, I became profoundly absorbed in my reflections. Even though he tried to hide my view, I made an effort to see through Lucas's fingers, still laughing as I teased them. At that moment, I instinctively adjusted my hand to keep my balance on Lucas's leg. I find myself unsure if it was intentional, yet my hand unintentionally brushed against something in his pocket. The touch, steady and inviting, immediately quickened my pulse. I retracted my fingers. Suddenly, a wave of panic surged in my chest. I couldn't bear to look at Lucas or Ethan. Consumed by an intense feeling of humiliation, I expressed my regrets for my quick stammering. I rushed to my room and slammed the door. I pressed against it, my heart pounding as though I had done something wrong. As I sat on my bed, the recent events lingered in my mind, refusing to fade away. Was I reading too much into it? Or was it just a coincidence? The sensation from Lucas's pocket remained in my mind, stirring my cheeks to flush. My thoughts were clouded with uncertainty, and yet, the weight of shame lingered heavily. I pondered if Ethan and Lucas would simply overlook the incident. Nevertheless, I found myself unable to stop dwelling on that moment, not because I had engaged with something unacceptable, yet due to my unintentional breach of a limit. It was the first time I realized that the barrier between us, which I had always thought to be unbreakable, was more fragile than I had expected. Later that evening, after isolating myself in my room for a while, I decided to venture down. I was ravenous. I knew my family was likely waiting for me to come back. Yet I couldn't shake off the feeling of embarrassment from earlier. Uncertain if Ethan and Lucas were reflecting on the incident, I comforted myself that it might not be as serious as I had thought. Maybe they missed it. I quietly opened my door and carefully made my way down the hallway, trying to avoid any eye contact with them. As I neared the living room, I paused to take in the sounds around me. It seemed empty, and I breathed out in relief. I assumed they were in the kitchen or somewhere else. As I stepped into the living room, I was taken aback to find it completely empty. How strange, I pondered. I halted by the sofa where I had once settled, trying to figure out the channel that was currently playing. I noticed sounds around me. Lucas's voice echoed behind me, inquiring, "What? Are you going to Grace?" This took me by surprise. Ethan chuckled with delight, declaring, "You look just like a thief." Lucas and Ethan laughed as I stood there, a mix of surprise and delight washing over me, my hands pressed against my chest. "You both terrified me greatly," I proclaimed, trying to seem annoyed, yet unable to hold back my amusement. "What is your viewpoint?" "It seems you're involved in some sort of scheme," shady Ethan said with a playful smirk. With a raised eyebrow, Lucas softly rubbed my head and asked, "You're not planning to eat something, are you?" I became part of the laughter. The initial discomfort appears to fade away in their presence. I believed what I had touched couldn't possibly be as I imagined, for Ethan and Lucas were laughing. The understanding brought me a measure of comfort, and I made an effort to act as though nothing had occurred. "I was simply asking if anyone was around," I said, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere. "What are you two up to back there? Are you trying to instill fear in me?" Ethan asked. Pretending to be serious, "I meant to catch you off guard just a bit. But your response took me by surprise, Lucas." With a chuckle, "Who could have foreseen your unexpected jump?" Your expression was priceless. Laughter erupted among us all. The tension melted away in that moment. Lucas rested his hand on my shoulder and said, "Very well, let us proceed to dine. The whole family is eagerly anticipating your arrival." I yielded. With a smile, she trailed behind them into the kitchen where the whole family had gathered. My parents radiated warmth upon seeing me. I settled into a chair at the table. In the serene glow of the evening light during dinner, the conversation flowed with joy and laughter. My parents talked about their careers, while Ethan and Lucas occasionally joked with light-hearted banter. I took part, and the initial feelings of embarrassment seemed to fade away. After dinner, I helped my mother with the dishes and then moved on to my space to get ready for sleep. As I lay in bed that night, I pondered the day's events, still feeling a twinge of embarrassment about what had occurred. I no longer felt anxious. I felt a quiet sense of reassurance, convincing myself that everything would turn out fine. Ethan and Lucas were the most wonderful brothers I could ever hope for, and I drifted off to sleep, calmly confident that it was all behind me. I came to understand that my room was not a sanctuary of solitude. Their space was simply divided by a wall, enabling even the softest sounds, be it from a movie or melody, to seep through with ease. One morning I, known for my tendency to sleep in, woke up at 7 a.m. At an unusual, yet familiar hour. I first thought I had emerged from a dream I couldn't quite remember. Or maybe the sunlight streaming through the curtains had jolted me awake. As my awareness heightened, I began to notice an unusual sound coming from the room next door. My room was nestled between Ethan's and Lucas's. The house was built in a traditional style, featuring thin walls that permitted sounds from loud sound or visuals to seep into neighboring spaces. This morning, the sound was distinct, a departure from the usual conversations and activities of Anne and Lucas that I had grown accustomed to hearing. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was clear enough to capture my focus. First, I thought they were just watching an action movie. After a few minutes, I felt that something was off. The sound strayed from the usual film noise, emerging as sporadic fluctuations, at times languid, at times swift. My heart raced and a troubling thought sparked a warmth across my cheeks. I hesitated to acknowledge it, but as the sounds grew louder, I understood they were not music or typical chatter. Instead, they formed a sequence of quick, intimate noises mixed with deep inhalations that I tried to push my thoughts away. But the more I listened, the more I found myself convinced. I couldn't ignore the possibility that Ethan and Lucas were engaged with content of a mature nature. A surge of embarrassment washed over me, and I found myself questioning why I was awake to bear witness. My heart pounded with such intensity that it seemed on the verge of bursting, and my body felt as if it were consumed by fire. I lifted my hands to protect my face, trying to banish the unwelcome thoughts from my mind. I kept in mind that this was a personal matter. Yet, it grew more and more strange to listen to those noises coming from their room. We had consistently upheld a robust connection, and I never expected to find myself in such a challenging situation. I longed to silence it, yet the sounds persisted, growing louder and more insistent. I leapt from my bed and quietly opened my door, unsure of my next steps. The discomfort in my chest made it impossible to stay still, leading me to take a quiet stroll. Moving quietly down the corridor, I neared their door. Where the sounds were so clear that it felt as if the walls had vanished between us, I stood still at the door, feeling a mix of embarrassment and confusion wash over me. My heart raced, and my thoughts swirled in chaos. I had knowledge of this. It was likely a sentiment shared by many. Yet, listening to it from Ethan and Lucas's room was unmistakable. I had no knowledge of that. I paused, feeling the pressure of uncertainty as I bit my lip. I pondered the choice between retreating or staying put, pressing my ear against the door as I tried to steady my breathing. Though the noise drowned out any rational thought, a part of me longed to withdraw. Yet another side was entranced, unable to break free from the sounds. Suddenly, the door burst open, and I stepped back in disbelief. Lucas stood there, wide-eyed and bewildered, as though caught in a moment of wrongdoing, frozen and filled with doubt. What needs to be expressed? We stared at each other, enveloped in silence for what felt like forever. The stillness hung heavily in the air. Gasping for air, Lucas cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension that weighed heavily on him. Grace, what are you currently working on? His voice quivered as he stood there, flustered and clearly having difficulty keeping his cool. I averted my gaze, keeping my head down, and softly said, I was merely passing through them. My words lacked strength, yet they were the only ones I could summon at that moment. Then the sound within the room ceased. Suddenly, Ethan emerged from behind Lucas's face, reflecting Lucas's expression, flushed and brimming with discomfort. He cast a fleeting glance in my direction before swiftly averting his gaze, turning away, unable to meet either of our gazes. We all lingered in silence, uncertain of how to express ourselves. The atmosphere between us was charged, and it felt as if no one had the slightest idea how to ease it. I offered a hesitant smile, my fingers weaving through my hair as I tried to mask my unease. I was merely passing by, I reiterated, my voice quivering. Slightly. Nothing. I'm departing. I spun around and hurried back to my room, eager to flee the uncomfortable situation as swiftly as possible. I sensed their gaze following me as I walked away, yet I refrained from glancing back upon entering my room. I shut the door softly and leaned back against it, inhaling deeply. My heart raced, and it felt as though I had stumbled upon a scene I was never meant to see. Embarrassment settled heavily in my chest, and I found myself unable to shake off thoughts of the way Lucas and Ethan gazed at me, coupled with the uncomfortable silence that ensued, created a palpable tension in the air. It played back in my thoughts again and again. I attempted to cast aside the negative thoughts, yet the more I struggled, the more they intensified. I repeatedly reassured myself that this was merely an unforeseen circumstance, an occurrence no one desired, yet I couldn't shake the thought that it might have altered everything between us permanently. A brief moment later, a knock echoed at my door. My heart sank, and I suspected it wasn't my parents, as they typically only entered when they required me and could only be Ethan or Lucas. I inhaled deeply, attempting to soothe my anxious thoughts beforehand. As Lucas opened the door, he stood there, his expression mirroring the same embarrassment as before. He averted his eyes, his hands twitching uncomfortably. Grace, I truly apologize for what occurred earlier, he said gently. It's not what you believe. We were just watching a movie, and perhaps the timing wasn't quite right. Isn't that so? I paused for a moment, caught in hesitation, as I noticed the doubt reflected in Lucas's eyes. Then Ethan entered the doorway. Behind him, he appeared equally uneasy, his gaze flitting between me and Lucas, searching for the appropriate words. Silence enveloped the room for a few moments, with no one daring to break it. The silence enveloped us once more, and I sensed that we were all seeking a way to navigate beyond this. I understood that if this discomfort persisted, it would only exacerbate the situation, so I chose to shatter the stillness. I forced a smile, attempting to appear relaxed even though the atmosphere was thick with tension. Come on, I didn't mean it, I said. Don't look so tense. I was merely passing by, really. Ethan and Lucas exchanged a glance as if quietly conveying. After a brief pause, Lucas let out a sigh, a hint of a smile returning to his face. Honestly, Grace, you're fine. With this, you're not uncomfortable. I quickly nodded, attempting to provide some reassurance. Both. Yes, I'm fine, truly, I believe. We're all just a bit uncomfortable with it, so to simplify things, I proposed. What do you say we gather the three of us and have a conversation? Perhaps it will assist us. Let's clear the air. Both Ethan and Lucas looked taken aback by my suggestion, but after a brief pause, they nodded in agreement. We moved into my room, and I settled onto the bed. I chose to lighten the mood with a joke, glancing at Ethan and playfully teasing him. Thus, the film was so good you both forgot. About time. Ethan chuckled nervously, hiding his face behind his hands. Let's go. Grace, please stop with the teasing. We honestly didn't think you'd catch that. I arched my eyebrows in a teasing manner. I assumed you all increased the volume so I could catch it. Both chuckled, and the tension dissipated, leaving a sense of ease behind. Eventually, my curiosity overwhelmed me, and I stole a glance at Ethan and Lucas, contemplating whether I should voice the thoughts that had entered my mind. After a brief moment of hesitation, I collected the bravery to express. What if we explore an idea similar to what we see in films? The words escaped my lips before I could rein them in. I was uncertain about their reaction, yet an undeniable curiosity surged within me. Ethan and Lucas exchanged surprised glances with me. "Are you? Is that for real?" Lucas inquired, his tone brimming with uncertainty. I nodded, striving to maintain a serious expression. I was simply intrigued. "It wouldn't be a bad idea to give it a shot, would it?" I said softly, not daring to meet their gaze. "Absolutely not," Ethan responded, shaking his head decisively. They both averted their gazes, clearly uneasy, but I wasn't prepared to relent. I held onto both of their hands tightly, seeking to offer comfort to them and to myself. "Simply give it a try. I want to know what it feels like." After a long silence, Lucas sighed and finally said, "Okay, but just this once, and we keep it a secret." No one could discern his voice, which was low, underscoring the significance of the room's boundaries. Silence save for our breathing. My heart raced as we began each movement, careful yet brimming with intensity. I couldn't discern the passage of time, but it seemed as if the entire world had dissolved, leaving just the two of us. When it finally came to an end, the sunlight poured into the room, enveloping it in a tranquil hush. We remained silent, simply lying beside one another, our breaths in perfect harmony. The anxiety I had dreaded vanished, giving way to an even more profound bond. We made our way to the kitchen together to prepare lunch, and everything felt surprisingly effortless, as if nothing had transpired. Yet, beneath the surface, I sensed that the line between us had subtly changed as we settled down to eat. Lucas smiled at me and inquired, "Are you all right?" I nodded, offering a smile in return. "I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more now." I felt a flush at my own words. Yet they simply held my hand, smiling at me with warmth and affection. "You too," they said, and so we continued our meal, aware that our relationship had transformed. There was no regret, only a profound connection, one that would linger unvoiced yet unmistakable between us from that moment forward. Everything felt different, but in a subtle way. Our relationship, once pure and simple, had now crossed an invisible line. The intimacy we shared before had evolved into something more complex. Every time we looked into each other's eyes, there was a new understanding, a deeper connection that hadn't been there before. We didn't talk about it, but we knew the unspoken bond was there, shifting the dynamics between us in ways couldn't easily explain. But while the change in our relationship was undeniably deep down, I knew it wasn't right what we had done. The boundary we had crossed was wrong. We had given in to youthful curiosity, and while it brought us closer in some ways, it also left a mark on my conscience. I couldn't ignore the fact that we had broken some fundamental rules. Even if it was unintentional, our actions had altered the way I saw the world, and it weighed heavily on me. Sometimes I still feel the anxiety creeping in when I think back to that moment. The awkwardness hasn't completely disappeared. Whenever I look at Ethan or Lucas, I can sense the change in the air, an unspoken tension that lingers just beneath the surface. We never talked about what happened again, almost as if it were a silent agreement to forget it and move forward. But the way they treat me now is different. They're more careful and gentler in their actions, as though they're afraid to hurt me, even though I know they love me. As for me, I can't help but feel my heart race every time I meet their eyes. There's a mixture of excitement and anxiety, a feeling I've never had before. The curiosity of youth led us down this path, one that was filled with emotions we weren't ready to handle. Our connection is stronger, but it's also more complicated, and I know deep down things will never be the same. Again, looking back, I realize how impulsive and immature I was. Our actions, guided by curiosity and emotion, I crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I don't regret it, but I also can't deny the lingering feeling of guilt and confusion. It haunts me, reminding me that curiosity can sometimes lead us down dangerous paths. We may not have intended for things to happen the way they did, but they did, and now we're left to deal with the consequences. Through this experience, I've learned an important lesson. Curiosity, while natural, is not always worth satisfying, especially when it threatens the integrity of relationships and the boundaries that protect us. Life's boundaries aren't there to restrict us. They exist to protect us from making decisions we may regret. Sometimes holding back and staying grounded is the best choice. So to anyone reading this, I want to offer a piece of advice. Don't let temporary curiosity lead you into making decisions that could ruin the relationships you hold dear. Before acting on strong emotions, stop and think about the long-term consequences. Emotions, especially strong ones, are often fleeting, but the consequences they cherish the things that can last a lifetime. Relationships you have and respect the boundaries that come with them. True love, the kind that lasts, doesn't require impulsive actions to prove its strength. It's built on trust and respect, understanding and responsibility. That's the most important lesson I've learned. Transcribed by TurboScribed at AI. Go unlimited to remove this message.